When you paint in watercolor, you are painting essentially in reverse. And what I mean by that is you are painting your lightest values to your darkest values. It's very important to have a plan on what you need to be accomplishing in each phase of your painting. So today, I'm going to talk about the 3 phases of your painting and what your goal should be in each one of those phases. In other mediums, you can paint your painting from dark to light. One of the tricky things about watercolor is you're painting from light to dark. So in each phase of your painting, you need to remember the parts of your painting that you're trying to paint around. We talked about negative painting before, painting a shape around a shape to define it rather than painting the shape itself. So if you don't have a clear plan when you are in each phase of your painting, you're going to get way ahead of yourself and it's going to be very frustrating. So I remember back to when I was first starting to paint, I would want to paint all my values when I was first starting out. And the tendency is to do that because you want your painting to look like something. And when you're just painting your lightest values and maybe it's a wet into wet wash with colors kind of blending into each other, it doesn't really look like anything. It doesn't look like a painting yet. And one of the hardest parts is being patient and understanding what you're trying to accomplish in each phase along the way. So when you get to the end, it can all add up to what you want it to be, your finished painting. So let's talk about your first wash of your painting. The first thing I do is a drawing, and I'm creating my composition. I'm making sure everything is going to fit in my painting. And once the drawing phase is over, what I like to do is wet down both sides of my paper with a sponge. And I'm not trying to soak my paper here. I'm just getting it damp. And I do this for a couple reasons. The first reason is when the paper is damp, my colors are going to blend together more smoothly. I'm going to get a lot more of soft transitions from color to color. And that can be useful when I'm painting a sky or if I just want soft edges. Another reason I do this is it gives me more time to work on that first wash. Sometimes people tape their paper down and paint that way, and I used to paint that way for a long time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're wetting down both sides of your paper, it'll give you a little bit more time to work on this wash. It'll give you more time to switch colors and to think through what you want this wash to include if you're keeping the paper more wet. The other reason why I do it this way is because if you wet down one side of your paper, the paper is going to curl up and it's going to be a lot harder to work on. If you wet down both sides of your paper, it will actually lay flat on your surface. And so rather than staple or tape down my paper, I like this approach. It gives me more time to work on my first wash and the paper will lay flat on my surface. So let's talk about the goals of this first wash. The main goal here is to paint the lightest values of your scene. So in a lot of scenes, this is your sky. The bright areas, if you're painting a street scene, it's maybe the bright areas of the street. All the lightest values, that's all you really need to think about in this first wash. We don't need to move into our darks, any details, any middle value at this point, just your lightest values. The only thing I will say, if you're needing to preserve some of the white of the paper for a really bright area of your scene, then when you're wetting the paper, avoid that area with a sponge and make it a little easier to paint around that whitest area, that white of the paper that you're trying to preserve. Other than that, you're going to cover the whole sheet of paper with your lightest values. The key here is don't try to make this look like anything. This is just an abstract way of painting, and it actually can be really fun and relaxing. Stay away from your darks and your middle values. It's not time for those yet. And the main point is you're setting yourself up for the next phase of your painting. So whatever you're going to paint around with your middle values and your darks, this is the color that's going to shine through or be left behind of those washes. So that's what you need to remember, and that's what you're trying to accomplish in this first phase. Okay, the second phase is probably the most difficult of your painting, and that is your large connected middle value shape. So we've talked a little bit about value studies in the past. This is why value studies are very important, because you're finding that connected middle value shape, and that shape is going to lay over the top of your first wash, or those lightest values. And the reason why this phase is so challenging is because you have a lot to think about. You're thinking about the values within your middle values. If you're splitting your values up from 0 to 10, your first wash would probably be 0 through 3, and your middle values would be 4 through 7. And so we're saying one large middle value shape, but there's still differences of values even within that middle value shape. So this is complicated because you're thinking about values, you're thinking about edges and texture, and you're thinking about switching colors all at the same time. And so that's why this area is so difficult in the painting, and this takes the most practice. But there are a couple things you can do to make this phase a little bit easier. And the first thing is have a plan. So maybe create a value study, have a good understanding of what this middle value shape is before you start painting. Don't decide, okay, I've done my first wash, here's a tree, and just paint a tree, and then decide what else needs to be painted. Have a good plan in creating this large connected shape. The second thing I'll say is, because there are a lot of color changes in this middle value, pre-mix those colors. I even like to load up 2 or 3 brushes before I move into this phase. I might have a couple different shades of green and maybe a little bit of dark if I need some softer darks during this phase of my painting. But whatever you can do to set yourself up to think less and execute more is better. So think about those things before you enter your middle value shape. And finally, the last stage of the painting is the darks and the details of the scene. Now, this is maybe the most fun part of the painting, because this is when you actually get to see the painting come together. You've done your drawing, you've put in your lightest values, you've painted your middle values, and now when you paint your darks, you're finally getting to see the fruit of your labor here. And so this is when you'll start to see the light show up in your painting. You don't really have light in your painting until you have darks in your painting. So our middle value shape was all about finding connections. And when you get into the darks and the details of the painting, that's when you can start to create some separations. That's when your cars are going to look more like cars, and your figures are going to come together. And your scene is going to come together as a whole, because now you're adding in the darks and the details. So like I mentioned, you don't want to overdo this phase. You need to find the areas of the painting that need the most detail and other areas that can be left more unfinished. So it's important to take a look at your painting as a whole and make those decisions. It's easy to get carried away and paint because it's fun, but be mindful of what your painting needs and not necessarily just of what you enjoy painting or what you want to paint. I don't want to always spell everything out for the viewer. I think something that makes your painting interesting is leaving a little bit of mystery. This comes down to your preference. Take some time and think about that. Do you want it to be more defined? Do you want it to be more loose and open to interpretation? These are the choices that you need to make when you are in the final stage of your painting. Remember how each one of these steps add on to each other and what your final goal is. If you can remember that all along the way, you're going to paint much stronger paintings. And I wanted to mention, if you haven't seen my free video lesson, 8 tips to avoid overworking your painting, take a look at it. You can follow the link below, or you can get to it in my bio on Instagram. I've gotten some great feedback from this video lesson, and it's been very helpful to solve a big problem that I have had to deal with, and that is overworking your painting. I hope that you found this information helpful. Keep practicing, keep pushing forward, and I'll see you next time.